trying to call you.
I'll tell you, I give him 30 seconds. All right, hold on. Yeah. What is it now? I mean, we talked about last night. We talked about the business about you haven't. Have you had conversations with Trump's 12 cats, all named Whitey, yet? Says he's had conversations with him, and Basil's like a laser-guided missile. He's guiding them in to the bedroom where Donald and Melania Trump's Gucci's are. They're very expensive shoes. And Basil's guiding them in like little laser beam drones to drop some very, very, very interesting gifts into those shoes. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that on Friday night and on Sunday. Basil Budicap presents. Exclamation point, yada, yada. Bye. Welcome back to Progressive Soup. It's Thursday, noon 30, and with us again we have Nina Sherwood. And we were talking last night, about the Democratic Party. Interesting meeting she went to on Friday to talk about whether or not the Democratic Party as it stands can be salvaged, whether it can be more representative. And you want to talk a little bit about your experience. I had an experience outside the convention, the Democratic Party convention in Philadelphia. You had an experience inside of the convention.
Oh boy.
And how did that go?
Did I ever? I was also outside the convention center, and I can attest that outside was a lot more lively and hopeful and promising than inside. Inside of the convention center, well, as a Bernie delegate, there's a lot that went into becoming a Bernie delegate that taught me a lot about the Democratic Party. And so when you become a delegate in the state of Connecticut, to do that, there's a caucus. There's a caucus in each congressional district, and obviously the more votes that you get by people who show up to that caucus, if you win the popular vote, then you get to go to the convention and represent whichever candidate. In our case, we had a caucus for Bernie Sanders. And I ran on a slate. It was two men and one woman in our district. I ran on a slate with Chris Ioannidis and Louis Magana. And the three of us had done a tremendous amount of work. We went to 6 states for Bernie Sanders. We had over 100 events. We did barnstorms. We organized tirelessly for Bernie for 18 months. And we ran on a slate. We had little, we made water bottles that had our names on them to remind people who to vote for. And about an hour and a half before the caucus, I get a call from somebody within the Democratic Party telling me that Bridgeport, the largest city in my district, they needed representation, and we needed to let one of their people come onto our slate. And they asked me if I would basically pull my support from Chris or Louis, because I was the strongest person on that slate. And I said, no, I campaigned with the two of them. They've helped me. They've been my co-organizers. There's no way that I'm going to pull my support. And I was told that if I didn't do this, I would never have a political future, that I need to be willing to make compromises and deals in order to get anywhere within the party. And so that, to me, I was like, isn't this supposed to be about the best person who did the most work and who deserves to go and represent Bernie Sanders? And the reality of it was, no, to a lot of people, and a lot of people who've been involved in the Democratic Party, it wasn't about that. It was about making sure that the right deal was made in order to perpetuate my career. And the person on the other end of the phone told me that I was getting them in a lot of trouble for not making a deal with Bridgeport.
Really?
Yes. And so that, to me, that was a sign. And I said no, obviously. I still ran on the slate with Chris and Louis because, look, if Bridgeport wants to bring enough people to go to the convention and vote for them, then they should. And we should have a fair process. And so to be asked something like that, and looking back, as you know, who am I? I'm nobody. I've never been elected to office. But I'm being told that if I want to be anywhere politically within the Democratic Party, I need to start thinking strategically like this and do things that are against my morals and that don't jive with my integrity. And so that to me was a huge problem, and it was a wake up.
That's a red flag.
Yeah, especially because one of the people that I was asked to support instead of Lewis or Chris, I looked up their social media profile and they were Hillary supporters. I mean, they were literally in jackets.
I knew that was the punchline. I knew it.
So anyway, and the fact of the matter is that even at the very basic level within the Democratic Party, there's a lot of horse trading and there's a lot of things that are expected. And so if you have somebody who is higher up within the party, you can assume that they've made a lot of those kind of decisions in order to get to where they are. And that's a part of the reason that that bothers me about the party. That it puts on this face of democracy and one person, one vote, and we want to get the best person elected for the people. But the reality of it is that there's a lot of political pressure in the background to act a certain way and support certain issues. And that was kind of the first taste. Then,
side note, I have a lot of friends that are Republicans that told me very similar stories.
Oh, sure.
About how people that wanted to rebel against the Jadrul that became the candidate for their party, but wanted to rebel against him and go against the vote that they were pledged to, and to put their vote in for another candidate, a guy like John Kasich, who we know from his conversation with Bernie about a week ago. We know John Kasich is a much more reasonable, palatable, moderate, decent human being Republican. And yet, they wouldn't let people in the Republican Party with higher moral standards go against the gentleman that ended up being their candidate. Damn dogs. So continue.
Yeah, and I don't mean to, keep, nagging and complaining about the Democratic Party, and that's not to, I want to make sure that people understand that that's not because I think the Republican Party is better. I think we have a two-party system failure of representing the people. I think a lot of people realize that the Republican Party is not really the party of the middle class and the laborer and the environment. I mean, I think that's been very clear.
That's an observation that many, many, many Americans are making.
Yeah.
And people seem to forget that you've got three groups in America. You've got the Democratic Party, you've got the Republican Party, and you've got unaffiliateds. And unaffiliateds account for the largest chunk of American voters.
Absolutely.
American voters by a large plurality over either party. So those are the folks that sway the election.
Sure.
And those are the folks that have consciously decided that I'm not a Democrat, and consciously decided that I'm not a Republican because I don't like either party.
Right.
Those are the folks who we're looking at.
Right.
Go ahead.
And so I think, like I said, the Republican Party, people realize that they're not, the party for the middle class and labor. But we look to the Democratic Party that kind of mouths these values very often, but yet when it comes to policy, they haven't really gotten much done for us. And getting back to my story about the convention.
Yes.
As Bernie delegates, we were required to do a bunch of different conference calls in the weeks leading up to the convention to kind of prep us for what the Bernie staffers were telling us was going to be some sort of floor fight. And Bernie had endorsed Hillary Clinton at that point, getting close to the convention, but he was saying that he wanted to fight for a better platform. And we were, basically being trained on how to do that. And we get to the convention center. All of the plans that we were told were going to take place as his almost 1,100 delegates, those were all canceled, and he called us all into a meeting at a different convention center in downtown Philadelphia. So all of us Bernie delegates were in this convention center. They locked the doors, and they locked the doors and got rid of all the press, and it was literally just us 1,100 Bernie Sanders delegates. And Bernie came out and I have to say that he was the most tired, upset, drained, and low energy I've ever seen him. He was like looking down, his body language was defeated, and he just said, I'm supporting Hillary Clinton, and you guys will too. There's not going to be a floor fight. And he's just like looking down. Literally, us delegates were just crying. We're standing in that room, boys, girls, all of us just standing there like crying, like, are you serious? Is that like, I thought we were going to have some sort of like a convention. That's what a convention is supposed to be.
With floor fights like you normally have in a convention.
Right. But when we walked into that convention center, it was like Hunger Games. It was very obvious that here are the lanes that you can, that you can drive in, and if you steer off in any direction, you're going to be removed. If you get up and leave, we're going to replace your seat with somebody. When one of the most telling moments was when James Mad Dog Mattis, one of Trump's picks, who is now serving in the cabinet, he gave a speech at the Democratic convention and at the Republican convention. And so that to me, I'm like, why is he here? I mean, the guy's literally written manifestos about how he enjoys killing people. And he's arguably a war criminal on a lot of different accounts, although he hasn't been brought to account on those things.
The behavior's been there, though.
Oh, yeah. And he, the Democratic Party, I guess, hired these people to come in with these harnesses and these massive flags. And there's like 100 flags with that are with these people holding these flags around the convention center, and they're all waving them, and everybody's like into this whole like ginned up war thing. And he starts speaking, and us Bernie delegates, there's over 1,000 of us there, are just chanting the most simple thing ever: no more war, no more war, no more war. And then the Hillary people put a fist up in the air and were screaming at the top of their lungs to drown us out, USA, USA, and over and over again. And I had just seen that at the Republican convention, and I'm like, oh my God, aren't we supposed to be the party that's against war? Every single, Obama got elected because he was against war.
At least immoral wars.
Right.
As we were against the invasion and occupation of Iraq.
Sure.
But now these folks on the convention floor sound like they're gung-ho for further invasions and occupations.
And then you see, I was kind of at the top. Connecticut was like kind of towards the top, and so I could see the entire convention center. And you literally, over parts of California and over parts of Washington State, which were the loudest contingency of Bernie Sanders, they just shut the lights off. I mean, and we're just like, are you like, it's not a convention at all. It's like a staged theatrical event. And it said that, everybody's unified. And then when Bernie Sanders gave us delegates away, I was down on the floor with Louis Magana, and we were looking up at everybody when Bernie Sanders spoke and gave his delegates to Hillary Clinton, making her the nominee. As soon as he did that, there's just people crying, and they're playing the song Happy, which is like, why would you play that song to begin with? But you can see the hordes of people just leaving the convention center. They're just coming down. They're like leaving. And I get a press alert on my phone from AP, and it says, it is estimated that 200 Bernie Sanders delegates have left the convention center. And I'm like looking at my phone, I'm like, are you serious? I'm standing in here and half the people have left. And Louis and I walked out. We walked out with everybody else. And there were, you saw the pictures, I'm sure, like Bernie Sanders delegates with tape over their mouth. We were silenced. Like, we were basically told that if we speak up, that if we start chanting anything that's not, with the rest of the crowd, that we're going to be asked to leave, that we are going to, again, ruin our political career, that we have bright futures and all this stuff. And so that, and outside of the convention center where you were, there was like so much hope and so much like love and compassion and forward thought for the future. And within that convention center, it was very, all that kind of energy was stifled consistently.
Alluding back to your remark about things that you were promised if you fell in line.
Oh yeah, I was
personally.
Yeah.
I know that, and it's very, very well known, and Henry's nodding his head, he knows it too, that town committees in our state, in Connecticut, had promises made to them by the Clinton campaign.
Sure.
Of, well, we're going to pay for your headquarters, we'll pay for your party headquarters. All these promises that were made in order to sway party leaders in the 169 towns in Connecticut to toe the line for their candidate.
Yep.
They used the power of, I guess you'd call it the dollar and the bullwhip, to get people in line behind the anointed candidate who, I'll go out on a limb, I'll say this, if every state in the United States, if the Democratic Party had open primaries, that's to say you weren't limited to voting in a Democratic Party primary in your state if you were unaffiliated, it's the same way New Hampshire does every time around, and a lot of states do, then Bernie Sanders would be the candidate.
Absolutely. And
because in fact, every state that was open party, open primary, and you could take a look at the Democratic Party as an unaffiliated voter and weigh in on who you thought should be the candidate and consider becoming a member of the Democratic Party by participating in their primary. Every single one of those primaries, Bernie Sanders won.
Sure. Yeah.
That's...
I mean, the Democratic Party...
I want now, audience, don't take my word for it. I want you to do your fact checking. See if you can get some honest, unbiased, unvarnished facts. Then check that out and let us know. Continue.
Yeah, so, you know, the convention and all the things that we've heard, especially, you know, what the emails that we learned from WikiLeaks, I'm sure you've heard about the class action lawsuit against the Democratic National Committee and Debbie Wasserman Schultz for rigging the election towards Hillary Clinton. And is that fraud? Is it fraud that in their charter it says that they are supposed to be, quote unquote, fair and even-handed in their in the primary process for president, and they, you know, they send out fundraising emails, and Bernie Sanders campaigned and took donations for that primary process, and in reality, it was not even-handed. And so that's what the lawsuit's about. It also has to do with the very fact that primary elections are state-funded, so that's taxpayer dollars. And if they had already selected the candidate, how is it, you know, how is that not fraud to take money from the people without doing what you are, you know, you're supposed to be even-handed and fair, and that's why you're having this primary process, and yet you've already selected who the candidate's going to be, and you're going to tip the scales in order to get that person there. Would you have donated to Bernie Sanders if you knew that they were going to do this? If they had already picked?
That's a good question, and I'm going to make a comparison between 2008 and 2016. 2008, a fellow by the name of Howard Dean was the chair of the Democratic National Committee. He followed through on, as you mentioned, the way the chair of a political party is supposed to behave. He was non-biased. He never said or made any statement that would lead one to believe that he was either in favor of Hillary Clinton or Senator Obama or any of the other candidates. He was completely impartial. You cannot say, if you can, let me know, and I'll disagree with you. And you're wrong, by the way. You cannot say that Debbie Wasserman Schultz was in any sense unbiased in who she supported as the candidate for the Democratic Party in 2016. Quick shout out to Howard Dean, who, by the way, when he left the race in 2004, started Democracy for America. And Henry and Nina and I go to the meetings. Norwalk, first Wednesday of each month, Norwalk at the Silver Star Diner, right off exit 14 on the Connecticut Thruway. And
Doug Sutherland, the chairman.
Doug Sutherland, the chairman. Shout out to Doug Sutherland. And we have some great guests, and we continue to fight for progressive causes. And you may continue.
So yeah, this lawsuit is really interesting. The Democratic Party is asking the judge for the case to be dismissed. And the grounds that they're claiming it should be dismissed upon are disturbing in on themselves. And so instead of going, you would think, okay, if they're asking for the case to be dismissed, and the charter of the Democratic Party says that they have to be fair and even-handed, you would think that their argument is that we were fair and even-handed.
It would seem, yeah.
That is not their argument at all.
Really?
They're saying, oh yeah, of course we were fair and even-handed, but the reason this case should be dismissed is the reality is that the Democratic Party is a private institution, and if we want to, we can smoke cigars in a back room and select a candidate. And so we don't have any obligation to be fair and even-handed, even though it says it in our charter. And so, you know, this lawsuit can't be brought to trial because we can do whatever we want. And so regardless of whether or not, and it looks like the case is going to move forward. The judge has been known for really taking anti-corruption cases seriously. But even if it does get dismissed, the very fact that the Democratic Party is claiming to have that right should be alarming and upsetting to every person within the Democratic Party who believes in democracy. Because if, that's the highest seat in our land, the president. And they're saying, us, our little table of insiders that have been involved with the party, and the people we choose to be in our little circle, we can pick whoever we want, and you can't have any say. And that to me is a huge red flag.
Sounds like they're bragging that they're just like the Republican Party and too bad for anybody else. Sort of sounds like that to me, because this is something that you expect to hear from the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And yet here we are hearing that argument from the Democratic Party. And unaffiliated voters, take note, because I don't want to give away the ending to the story, but I will. If this doesn't work out, if we're not able to reform the Democratic Party from within, the obvious choice is to begin a new party. And there being a 40 or so % chunk of American voters already having chosen not to be Democratic Party members, not to be Republican Party members, you folks are the ones that are going to be the big ones. You're the most important of the most important ones in forming a third party, if that's the route that we go. But while we're still talking about the possibility of reforming the Democratic Party, we shall.
Yeah, so can the Democratic Party be reformed? This is me personally, at this point, from what I've seen, on a national level, no. The party has refused to look at what it did. I mean, I get the Connecticut Democratic emails like a couple times a week, and all they're talking about is how terrible Trump is. They don't talk about...
Really? They don't talk about how good they are?
No, they don't talk about any policy prescriptions that they have. And this is systemic at the top of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party had an opportunity a couple months ago when they were voting in a new chairman to vote in a rule that would not allow them to take money from corporations. And they overwhelmingly chose to continue to take that money and handcuff themselves into policies that don't work for the American people. And after seeing what I saw with the Bernie Sanders primary and knowing what happened, thank you to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, knowing what happened in those emails where Donna Brazile is feeding Hillary Clinton debate questions, and they're cutting the debates short because they know that Bernie Sanders getting more exposure, exponentially increases his base, and so we had less democracy, less debates than any other time in recent history for primary for president, and so I don't see that infrastructure changing. They have not even they haven't even given Bernie Sanders a real position power. They're allowing him to speak. He's able to go and promote different candidates. They're bringing him around the country, but they're not putting him in a position of power to fundamentally change policy. And so on a local level, can it be changed? I can tell you I'm working on that, and it takes a tremendous amount of work. And the question becomes, does that work to take over the Democratic Party? Is that more or less work than starting our own party? And that is the real question. That, I think, is the crux of how we move forward, is finding that and figuring out what the best way to go is, because it's not easy. I can tell you from experience, it's not easy.
Well, important point. This past weekend, Bernie Sanders was out in Montana, stumping and speaking along with a gentleman that's running for the one representative seat that Montana has. They have 2 senators, but they only have 1 representative because there's not a lot of people out in Montana. It's a beautiful state, not a lot of people. But he was out there this past weekend stumping for this candidate. And by the way, no one else from the Democratic Party was asked to go out there. Only Bernie Sanders. Now, I know that Henry Pietras in our audience, I don't know, but I'm gonna say that I think he believes that the Democratic Party can be reformed from within. I know that I do, but I also know that we've had a very interesting discussion amongst the 3 of us as to whether it can or it can't. And those things they remain to be seen. But you folks that are unaffiliated, hang around. We're looking at you. Thank you for joining us, Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, Nina Sherwood.
Thank you.
Melissa Gladstone behind the camera. Thank you, darling. Henry Pietras and the rest of our audience. And we shall see you next Wednesday evening, 9:30. Good night.